What's up, guys? Joe at Momentum Works. Today we're here to talk about the C word, COVID. Just kidding. Chinese turbos. We're going to talk about the good, the bad. Should you buy one? Should you not buy one? Are there ones you should stay away from? Or there's ones that might be pretty good in the market? Stay tuned. All right, guys. So it's no surprise that there's a lot of things manufactured in China. The phone I'm using to film this right now, manufactured in China. This tablecloth, manufactured in China. This 300-pound man, manufactured in China. Anyway, so we want to talk about the different qualities coming out. There's always been like a negative connotation around Chinese parts because when they first started coming into the US and you have these things like, eBay and Amazon that really facilitate easily for people to buy these parts even direct from China. The thing you really need to think about is the quality of it. There's great turbos that come out of China and there's terrible turbos that come out of China. Just like there's terrible parts and turbos that come out of everywhere. But it kind of really seems like there's a negative connotation towards Chinese turbochargers. So I want to take a deeper dive into that today and tell you what to look for when you're buying a turbo as far as quality, so you can kind of stay away from the bad ones. But on the same token, if you can save a couple bucks, sometimes there is a reason to buy a Chinese turbo over, the alternate. So there's no doubt that it's important to start with quality components, when you're building a turbocharger. But when it comes to that, a lot of people can produce a decent component. The important part is the balancing. If the turbo's not balanced correctly, it's not gonna last very long. Thinking about just installing a tire on a truck without balancing it. Yeah, you can drive it down the road, but it's gonna ride like hell. Same thing with the turbo, but the turbo is spinning at such a high rate of RPM. Depending on the application, you might be spinning 100,000 RPMs. If it's not balanced, it's just not gonna last long. It's gonna tear itself apart. So that's why the balance is so important. Now, with a lot of Chinese turbos, it's hit or miss. Some guys say, hey, I bought this turbo on eBay and it's lasted me 3 years. And somebody else buys a turbo from that same vendor and like, hey, it lasted 3 hours. And a lot of that comes down to quality control. It's not that the components themselves are bad. It really comes down to the balance. One was balanced, one wasn't. Or one was just assembled and the balance was pretty close, whereas another one was assembled and it wasn't close at all. We took a deeper look at this and we saw how there was some marks here and some marks there to really get it balanced. Some components come out and they're more balanced than others, just like tires. Some tires require more balancing and weight and shavings to others. Components are the same thing depending on how they're manufactured. Better manufactured components will need less balancing, but they're still going to need balancing nonetheless.
Oh, sorry. I forgot to take the air filter off of this turbo. One of our more popular Chinese manufactured turbos here at Momentum Works is this HE451VE style turbo. Now, this is what you would use on a single cam ISX, a 2250 or a 2350. This accepts the factory whole set VGT actuator. It bolts in stock place and functions just like a stock turbo. Anybody that deals with these VGT engines, turbos engines that use VGT turbos know that these things are extremely expensive. So this is a great cost alternative opposed to going back to the dealer, which really, they cost a fortune for these turbos. And God forbid your core's damaged and you'll get smoked on the core charge. So this is one of those times where a Chinese manufactured turbo really is a benefit. Now, there's good quality ones and there's bad quality ones. This is a good quality one. How do we know? Well, we took them apart when we first started selling them. And on top of that, we tested them. And, we put them in a couple local trucks and they ran really well. Now, one of the ways if you're buying one of these turbos is you can take a look in here and we're going to do our best. You can see there on the compressor wheel, there's some material missing, which means it was balanced. Doesn't necessarily mean that it was balanced correctly, but it means that it was balanced, which is something you want to look for in all turbochargers because balance is so important. And it won't just be balanced on the compressor side. It'll also be balanced on the turbine side. And I can't get the turbine wheel shaft out of this. I don't want to take it apart because if you take a turbo apart, it has to be rebalanced, which we'll visit in a second. But here you can see that this one has some balancing marks on the back of it, which means that this component was balanced before it was assembled. And then it's also got this mark on the back here there. A lot of people might think that that's damage, but that's not. That's a balancing mark. Now let's talk about the two different kinds of ways that you can balance a turbo.
So there's two ways that really most people balance a turbo. There could be another way, but these are the two most common ways. One, full cartridge balancing on a balancing machine, or rotor assembly.
Rotor assembly balancing, which is just the rotor set, your compressor wheel and your turbine shaft. Let's take a deeper look at each way of balancing. Originally, turbos were always balanced as the rotor set. And I'll see if I can drop a video of that happening here. And this method is great because, it's a lower cost. It's good to balance the components beforehand. But more recently, and I don't even really know if it's more recently, but, there's machines dedicated to balancing full cartridges. Like this, the full cartridge. So this is a whole turbo minus your compressor cover and your turbine housing. And balancing, in my opinion, is best done when the complete assembly is done, opposed to just balancing the rotor group. And that being, because think about even like the position of the nut. If you're shaving a little bit off the nut or the wheel for the balancing, hypothetically, when you're putting that rotor group back together, if the nut's in a slightly different position, you might throw off the balance of the turbo itself. One of my other main benefits, and all the turbos that we sell here are all machine balance on a turbo balancer that does the whole cartridge, is that you put this on, you put an oil feed to it and an oil drain to it, obviously, and you have air spinning this wheel. And basically what it's going to do, it's going to simulate what it's like when this is on your vehicle. So basically air is spinning the turbine wheel, and you can always see that. You see these little colorful marks on the wheel? Now, if you're an old school carbureted guy, think about a points engine, and you're timing an engine. You have a timing light. Well, the balancer works the same way. You have these marks on the turbo, and there's a light that's shining down on there so that they know where to take material off of the turbo. Now, what I was getting back to is the main benefit outside of balancing the turbo, of course, of doing the whole cartridge on the balancer is that it's under oil pressure. So if you had an oil leak somewhere, so if one of the piston ring seals inside the turbo wasn't quite seated correctly or something wasn't assembled correctly, you're gonna catch it right there on the balancer because it's gonna start to leak right then and there. Whereas if you send it to a customer, they put it on, hey, it's leaking, yada, 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 it's a big issue. Any problems you have are normally caught on the balancer because it's gonna be a real world scenario under oil pressure. So really in passing, some guys aren't gonna wanna hear it, but all Chinese turbos aren't bad. There's some that are just god-awful. Terrible, don't buy them. But there's a lot of turbos coming out of China that are of decent quality, and a lot of the big names, I'm not going to mention them because I'm not trying to get sued, also manufacture in China. So don't write a turbo off because it was manufactured in China. Write a turbo off because it's not a quality build. If you look at it and it's got decent components, it's been balanced correctly, and it's being sold by somebody that's going to stand behind it, you should probably use it. It'll probably be a decent piece. But if you buy one off like a no-name seller on eBay, it might be fine or it might explode. It's like Russian roulette because there's no quality control. So like I said, good components, good balance, should last a long time. Guys, if you have any questions, please feel free to give us a shout. If you're interested in this specific turbo for an ISX Cummins, we do have them in stock in both horsepower levels. The 288-2111 is for the lower horsepower, the 288-2112 is for the higher horsepower trucks, and you can put the higher horsepower turbo on the lower horsepower trucks. Any other questions, feel free, leave them in the comments below. I'd be happy to help. Thanks so much, guys. Take care.